I never thought that one sentence from my own daughter could feel like a knife twisting in my chest. "You'll be out of here by morning, Mother. The house is sold." The words hung in the air, poisonous and thick, heavier than the heavy drapes that blocked the late afternoon sun. My living room, my sanctuary for over 4 decades, suddenly felt foreign, invaded. Lauren stood in front of me, her arms crossed tightly over her expensive blouse, like she was trying to hold her composure. She couldn't even look me in the eye. Beside her, Brent lounged on the arm of the couch, smug and relaxed. He didn't bother hiding his satisfaction. I didn't flinch. Not yet. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. My hands stayed folded in my lap, fingers steady, though I felt my stomach tightening. "So," I said, my voice cold and deliberate, "you found a buyer for my house." And without speaking to me first. Brent let out a quiet chuckle, like a mosquito buzzing near my ear. "It's not just your house, Evelyn. You're getting older. You need care. Lauren and I have discussed this at length. This place is too much for you." Lauren's voice cracked as she added, "We've already secured a wonderful room at St. Joseph's Assisted Living. You'll be very comfortable there. They even have a garden." A garden. The word made my throat burn. This house, this land, my roses, my lilies, every stone in the walkway, my late husband's hands had placed them. And they thought they could bury 43 years of my life under fake concern and legal paperwork. I let the silence stretch until even Brent shifted uneasily. Then I spoke, slow and sharp. "No addict," I said, my eyes drilling into Brent, "is ever going to touch my assets." His smirk twitched. His little poker habit wasn't so little. I knew that. They thought I didn't. Lauren exhaled sharply, her voice rising. "This isn't about Brent's past mistakes. This is about what's best for you." "Best for me?" I wanted to scream. "Best for me?" Instead, I straightened my back. "I see. You two believe you've won something today. You believe you're protecting me." My voice softened, laced with venom. "But you're protecting yourselves. From your own debts, from your own failures." Brent's mask of calm cracked. "Watch your tone, Evelyn." "Or what?" I whispered. "You'll gamble away someone else's house?" Lauren gasped, but Brent's face turned red. He stood, towering over me. "You're being paranoid. And ungrateful. We've sacrificed plenty for you." Ungrateful. That word rolled around my head like a bitter pill I refused to swallow. "You sacrificed nothing," I said calmly. "You calculated. And you assumed I was weak." I stood slowly, my knees stiff but strong beneath me. I looked him squarely in the eye. "You forget who you're dealing with, Brent." He blinked, thrown off by my quiet resolve. I saw Lauren clutch his arm, as if trying to pull him back into their rehearsed script. But I had already shattered it. "I built this life long before you showed up. And I won't let you dismantle it because you're running out of credit lines." The clock ticked loudly behind us. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Brent hissed, "You'll regret this." I smiled. A small, cold smile. "We'll see." Just a few days ago, I was here, in this same house, sipping my tea in the garden like I always did. The sun had just broken through the early fog, casting a soft golden light over my roses. The pink ones were finally blooming after a stubborn winter. My husband used to say those roses were the most patient thing on this property. 43 years tending to this soil together. Now it was only me, and still I found peace here. I remember humming to myself as I trimmed the hedges, feeling that quiet satisfaction only routine can bring. The weight of the shears in my hand, the gentle rustle of leaves. It was my own little world, untouched. If I had known what Lauren and Brent were planning that very same week, I might have clipped those hedges a little harder, maybe crushed a few thorns between my fingers. But that morning, I was naive enough to believe things were steady. I paused to take a sip of tea, feeling the warmth in my chest as I admired the house. My house. White brick with deep green shutters, every inch of it built on sacrifices. My late husband, Richard, had poured his soul into this place. Every paycheck, every overtime shift, every weekend project. We had raised Lauren here. She was just a baby when we laid the foundation. I used to think she cherished this place as much as I did. Back when she used to run barefoot through the garden, squealing with delight as Richard chased her around the willow tree. Back when she would sit with me on the porch, drawing pictures of our home with crayons. But people change. Or maybe they simply grow into who they were always meant to be. Lately, she visited less. Always too busy. Always some excuse. When she did come, she was polite, but distant. Her eyes lingered on the property more than on me, like she was assessing something, appraising it, measuring its worth in dollars, not memories. I should have seen it sooner. The wind picked up that morning, rustling the wind chimes Richard had hung for our anniversary one year. They sounded softer now, older. Like me, I suppose. I went back to tending my roses, carefully cutting back the old growth, humming an old tune. I never needed much to be happy. Just this home, this garden, and the quiet. But as I wiped the dirt from my gloves, I noticed the mailman approaching. I waved. He handed me a few envelopes, bills, some charity appeals, and one letter that made my stomach tighten just a bit. A glossy brochure from St. Joseph's Assisted Living. I hadn't requested any information from them. I stared at it for a moment, my hand trembling ever so slightly. My first instinct was to shrug it off, probably just random marketing. That's what I told myself. But somewhere deep in my chest, a tiny ember of suspicion started to glow. I carried the mail inside, placing it neatly on the kitchen counter. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and lavender. My scents, my routine. And yet, standing there in my kitchen, staring at that brochure, a chill ran through me. 2 days after that unsettling morning, Brent came by. Alone. That in itself was unusual. Normally, Lauren led the conversations. She was always the voice. He hovered like a shadow behind her, playing the dutiful husband. But not today. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counters when I heard his car pull into the driveway. That rumbling old truck of his. I peeked through the curtain. He was sitting in the driver's seat for a moment, adjusting something, almost as if rehearsing. Then he got out and strolled up the walkway with that forced casualness he always wore when he wanted something. I opened the door before he could knock. "Brent," I said flatly. "Didn't expect you." He smiled too wide, his teeth flashing like cheap poker chips. "Hey, Evelyn. Thought I'd drop by, see how you're doing." I stepped aside without answering, letting him in. The air shifted immediately. I could feel his eyes scanning the living room, the hallway, the house itself, like a man sizing up a prize he thought was already his. He followed me into the kitchen, standing awkwardly by the table as I poured myself some tea. I didn't offer him any. "You know," he started, rubbing his hands together, "Lauren's been a little worried about you lately. She thinks maybe you've been overexerting yourself." I said nothing, just blew gently across the surface of my tea. "I mean, it's a big house for one person," he continued. "All that upkeep, the yard work, the repairs. It's a lot. You shouldn't have to deal with all that stress at your age." There it was, the rehearsed line, the opening gambit. I tilted my head, watching him. "Stress, Brent?" My voice was calm, but I let the chill seep through. "You think tending my roses is stressful? Cooking my own meals? Living in the home I built with my husband?" He chuckled lightly, trying to keep the mood light. "It's not just about that, Evelyn. You know what I mean. Accidents happen. What if you slip? What if you forget to lock the doors one night? God forbid something serious happens when you're alone." I felt my lip tighten. "I'm perfectly capable of locking my doors." He pressed on, a bit too eagerly. Of course you are. But Lauren and I have just been talking, you know. Thinking ahead. Planning responsibly. You've worked so hard your whole life. You deserve to relax. To have people looking after you. You shouldn't be burdened with bills, with maintenance. Let someone else carry that load." I smiled faintly, letting him sit in his own false kindness for a moment. "And who exactly would carry that load, Brent?" He hesitated. "Well, we would, of course. You know Lauren and I love you. We'd make sure everything's handled. Financially, legally. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. We'd handle your accounts, pay the bills, keep everything in order." My stomach turned. There it was, laid out plainly beneath the syrupy words. The quiet theft dressed up as concern. I kept my voice steady. And how would you manage that? Are you suggesting I hand over control of my estate? He gave a soft laugh, waving his hand dismissively. Not control, just some guidance. Power of attorney, maybe. It's really common. Just a safeguard, purely administrative. I set my teacup down, the ceramic clinking against the saucer. I'll think about it, I said quietly. He smiled, thinking he'd made progress. But in that moment, something inside me solidified. I wouldn't be thinking about it. I would be watching now. Very carefully. By the end of the week, my gut wouldn't let me rest. Brent's visit hadn't been a friendly drop-in. It was a scouting mission, and that brochure from St. Joseph's hadn't arrived by accident. They were moving. Quietly, but fast. I decided to pay a visit to the bank. Not for any particular transaction, at least not officially. I wanted to look them in the eye. I wanted to see if my accounts had been tampered with. I wanted to feel the room. The bank manager, Mr. Collier, had known Richard and me for decades. We weren't close friends, but there was a respect there. He smiled when he saw me approach the counter. "Mrs. Whitaker," he greeted warmly. "How can I help you today?" I kept my tone light, pleasant. Just thought I'd come in and review my accounts. Nothing urgent. Of course. He motioned for me to follow him to his office. I could see him glance at the screen as he pulled up my records. Something in his brow twitched, just barely. I caught it. "Everything in order?" I asked, folding my hands in my lap. He paused a beat too long. "Yes, everything's intact. But," he cleared his throat, "may I ask, have you authorized anyone recently to make inquiries or adjustments to your accounts?" My pulse slowed. My entire body stilled, but I kept my face neutral. "No, I haven't authorized anyone." He nodded slowly, tapping a key. "Well, we received a request earlier this week. A man came in, said he was acting on your behalf with power of attorney documents. He tried to access your financial statements." The room felt colder. "A man?" I asked, though I already knew. "Brent Connolly. Your son-in-law, I believe?" I exhaled through my nose, keeping my hands folded tight. "Yes, that's him." Mr. Collier's voice dropped slightly, professional but concerned. I found it odd that we hadn't received prior notification. And frankly, the document he provided appeared questionable. He reached into a folder on his desk and pulled out a copy of the form. Forged signatures are not always easy to detect, but we have protocols. I leaned forward and examined the paper. My signature sat there at the bottom, shaky, exaggerated, almost cartoonish. Anyone who knew my handwriting would laugh, but of course, Brent counted on no one looking closely. "I'm very grateful you followed protocol, Mr. Collier." My voice was steady, but inside, I felt the slow rise of something hot and dangerous. "I notified our legal department immediately," he continued. "For now, access remains fully restricted to you alone. But I thought you should know." I smiled, not out of warmth, but out of clarity. "Thank you. You did the right thing." He hesitated. "Do you want us to alert the authorities?" I shook my head. "Not yet." I stood up, smoothing my coat. "But please note every attempted access, every inquiry, and notify me directly if anyone tries again." He nodded. "Absolutely." As I left the bank and stepped into the crisp afternoon air, my mind sharpened. They weren't waiting. They weren't planning. They were already acting. Brent didn't just want control. He thought he had it. And Lauren, whether she was leading or simply enabling him, had signed herself into this scheme completely. I walked down the sidewalk with my head high, the wind tugging at my scarf. They had made one critical mistake. They believed I would stay quiet. That evening, I needed a familiar face, someone who still saw me, not as an asset, not as an inconvenience, but as me. I called Martha. She answered on the first ring, like she always did. "Evelyn, everything all right?" Her voice was soft, warm, and I realized how tightly my chest had been wound all day. "Could you meet me for dinner?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Of course, dear. The cafe?" The cafe. The little place hadn't changed in years. Tucked at the corner of Main and Cedar, it was never too loud, never too crowded. Just small enough to feel safe. As I walked in, Martha was already seated in our usual booth by the window. She stood and opened her arms without a word. The hug almost broke me right there. I swallowed the lump in my throat and sat down across from her. We ordered pot roast for her, grilled salmon for me, and only after the waitress walked away did Martha reach across the table, folding her hands gently over mine. "Tell me." I exhaled slowly, feeling the words build in my throat. "Lauren and Brent are trying to take the house." Her eyes sharpened immediately, but she didn't gasp or panic. She simply listened. I knew that's why I had come to her. "They forged documents," I continued, my voice steady but my hands tightening. "Power of attorney. Brent tried to access my accounts this week." Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. "The nerve," she whispered. "After everything you've done for her." I nodded. 43 years in this house. Richard built every inch of it. And now they think they can shove me into some nursing home and cash out my life. Her grip on my hands tightened. "Evelyn, you need a lawyer. Right now." "I've already thought of that," I said. I didn't want to rush into something emotional, but after today, I paused, swallowing hard. After today, I see it for what it is. This isn't some misguided concern. This is theft. Martha sat back, nodding slowly. "You need someone ruthless. Protective." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "You called Daniel Grayson." "Daniel Grayson?" I repeated. The name sounded familiar. "Estate attorney. Remember my sister's mess a few years back? Her kids tried to pull something similar after her surgery. Daniel handled it, locked everything down airtight." I nodded, tucking the name away like a weapon. Martha leaned in again. "You don't wait, Evelyn. You move first, quietly. Secure what's yours before they file anything in court." I looked into her kind, steady eyes. She wasn't just giving advice. She was handing me my first real foothold in this battle. "They think I'm too old to see what's happening," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "They think they're smarter." "They think wrong," Martha said firmly. "You've never been weak, Evelyn. Quiet, yes. Patient, yes. But weak? Never." For the first time all day, I felt something flicker inside me. Not anger, not fear, focus. The next morning, I called Daniel Grayson. His assistant scheduled me for a meeting that very afternoon. She didn't ask many questions, only verified my identity, as though this sort of situation wasn't exactly rare for their office. That was oddly comforting. The firm sat on the fourth floor of a glass office building downtown. Clean, quiet, serious. The kind of place that didn't waste time with coffee bar pleasantries. Daniel Grayson was younger than I expected. Mid-40s, sharp suit, sharp eyes. But his handshake was firm, and when he gestured for me to sit, I sensed no condescension, only attentiveness. "Mrs. Whitaker," he began, folding his hands on the desk. "Martha gave me a brief heads up before your appointment. I understand there's concern about your daughter and son-in-law attempting to take control of your estate." I nodded. "They've already tried. My son-in-law presented forged power of attorney documents at my bank. The bank refused him, thankfully. But this wasn't a mistake, Mr. Grayson. It was intentional. They're moving fast." He nodded, taking notes. "Do you currently have any active legal designations? Any legitimate power of attorney? Medical directives, living trusts, co-signers?" "No. My late husband and I kept everything in joint ownership until he passed. Since then, everything's solely in my name. I haven't signed anything else, especially not for Lauren or Brent." Grayson paused for a moment, tapping his pen against the notepad. "Good. That makes this easier to untangle." His calmness was a steadying force. He continued, "You've been extremely fortunate your bank flagged the forgery. That may be crucial, Forging power of attorney is a serious felony if we need to escalate, but ideally, we'll neutralize them before they dare file anything legally. Neutralize, I repeated softly. I liked his choice of words. He leaned forward. What I recommend is we begin an immediate revocation of any unauthorized claims and lock down your estate entirely. That includes securing the deed, your financial accounts, retirement holdings, insurance beneficiaries, everything. We'll file a formal affidavit affirming your mental competency, which makes any claim of you being, quote, unable to manage your affairs nearly impossible to argue in court. He paused, watching my face carefully. I know this sounds aggressive, but you're not overreacting, Mrs. Whitaker. What they've done, and are trying to do, is financial abuse. It's criminal. The only mistake would be waiting. I exhaled, feeling my fingers slowly uncurl from their white-knuckled grip. Do it, I said. Whatever needs to be done, do it. Quietly, but completely. Grayson smiled faintly. I was hoping you'd say that. He slid a stack of documents toward me. We'll start with these authorizations. I'll file the affidavit by tomorrow. Once these protections are in place, even if they try anything, the courts will see them coming a mile away. As I signed each form, line by line, something inside me shifted. This wasn't defense. This was offense. When I left the office, stepping back into the sharp spring air, I felt the weight in my chest finally begin to ease. Lauren and Brent had started a game they thought they could control. Now they were playing my game. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was anxious. Not anymore. It was something else. A kind of readiness I hadn't felt in years. By morning, I was already planning the next layer of protection. I wasn't waiting for their next move. I called a locksmith first. By noon, every exterior lock in the house was changed. Front door, back door, garage, all with new, reinforced deadbolts. The locksmith, a polite young man with quick hands, smiled politely as he worked. Family trouble? He asked casually. I only gave him a small, cold smile. Just being careful. Next came the security company. I upgraded the system entirely. New cameras installed outside, motion detectors inside. Every entrance was covered. I even added a small camera tucked discreetly into the corner of the living room, pointing directly at the main sitting area. By late afternoon, I stood in the entryway, looking at the tiny green lights blinking silently on the new control panel. The house had never felt more solid beneath my feet. This was my fortress. But I wasn't done. That evening, I met with Stephen Patel, the financial advisor my husband and I had trusted years ago when we first built our retirement accounts. We hadn't spoken much since Richard passed, but Stephen welcomed me with the same warm professionalism he always had. I need every account reviewed, I told him, line by line. I want to be certain nothing's been touched, not even by accident. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing, pulling up the files. As we went through each document, each balance, I could feel my pulse slow. Everything still sat exactly where it belonged. Brent hadn't gotten that far, yet. Stephen glanced at me when we finished. You're locking everything down, Evelyn. May I ask, how bad is this? I met his eyes. They've already tried forging my signature. They're not after my well-being, Stephen. They want my assets. He exhaled sharply and nodded. Then I'll assign an internal monitor on every account. No one makes a single transaction or inquiry without my personal notification. We'll freeze any unusual activity instantly. I nodded. Thank you. As I gathered my paperwork and stood to leave, Stephen hesitated. And Evelyn, if you ever need me to testify, just say the word. You have every right to protect yourself. I smiled, but this time, it wasn't forced. That day may come sooner than we think. By the time I returned home, the sun was already dipping below the trees. The house glowed warmly in the fading light, but I saw it differently now. Not just as my home, but as a battlefield prepared. They wanted to come for what I built. They saw my age, my quiet routine, my solitude, and assumed it meant weakness. It didn't take long. 3 days later, Brent showed up again, this time without pretending. No friendly small talk, no fake concern, just pure confrontation. I was in the living room rearranging some photo frames when I heard the doorbell. I didn't answer immediately. I let him wait. I wanted him to feel that small sting of not being welcomed. When I finally opened the door, he didn't even bother with pleasantries. "We need to talk. Now." I stepped aside without a word, letting him in. He walked straight into the center of the room like he owned it, like he was inspecting something he was about to take. I closed the door behind him and calmly sat down, folding my hands in my lap. "Go ahead." He didn't sit. He loomed. "I'm going to be very clear with you, Evelyn. You're making this far more difficult than it needs to be." I looked up at him, my voice cool. "Am I?" "Yes," he snapped. "This house, this whole situation, is spiraling because you refuse to acknowledge what's happening. You're not well." My jaw clenched. "Excuse me?" "You're getting forgetful," he continued. "Paranoid. You think everyone's out to get you, even your own family. You've isolated yourself. You're not thinking clearly." I could feel the old fury beginning to rise, but I kept my voice steady. "And you think that's enough to take everything from me?" He smirked, pacing slowly like a man rehearsing his testimony. "You're unfit to manage these assets, Evelyn. A court-appointed conservatorship would see that. They'd declare you incompetent, assign someone responsible to handle your affairs, someone like Lauren and me. It's for your own protection, really." I let that hang in the air. I wanted to see just how far he was willing to go. "You've already forged documents once, Brent," I said softly. "Do you really think you'll get away with trying again? With dragging me into court?" His face twitched, but he covered it quickly. "You can claim whatever you want, but once this goes legal, your medical history, your financial decisions, every small mistake you've made will be picked apart. The court won't care how many roses you've planted. They'll care that you're vulnerable." I stood up slowly. The camera hidden in the corner blinked silently, recording every word. "You've miscalculated, Brent." My voice was barely above a whisper. "You believe you're talking to a frail old woman. But I assure you I am fully aware, fully prepared, and fully protected." He stepped closer, trying to tower over me, his voice lowering. "We can still settle this privately. Sign over the estate. Move into St. Joseph's. We'll handle everything. You'll live comfortably, I promise." I held his gaze, unflinching. "No addict will ever touch my assets. Not now. Not ever." For the first time, I saw a flash of panic behind his arrogant facade. It was quick, but it was there. "You're making a huge mistake, Evelyn," he hissed. "No," I whispered. "You already did." I walked to the door and opened it wide. "We're done here. You may leave." He hesitated for a moment, eyes scanning the room like a man realizing the game had shifted. Then he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was sharp, but I didn't feel shaken. I felt ready. The moment Brent's car disappeared down the street, I walked calmly to the far corner of the living room. The tiny green light on the hidden security camera was still blinking. Every word, every threat, every arrogant smirk recorded. I knelt down, carefully detached the micro SD card, and placed it into the small black case I'd bought just days earlier. My hands didn't shake. Not this time. For years, I tolerated. I endured. I smoothed things over to keep peace in the family. But there was no smoothing this over anymore. I called Daniel immediately. "Mr. Grayson," I said as soon as he answered. He came. His voice was calm but alert. "Did anything happen?" "He tried to intimidate me," I said. "Threatened court action. Claimed I'm mentally incompetent. Said conservatorship would be assigned." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Did he put that in writing?" "Better," I said, walking toward my desk. "I have it on video." There was a pause. "Video?" I smiled to myself. The entire conversation, audio and visual, clear as day. No coercion, no editing, just him talking. I heard the slight shift in Daniel's tone. Respect. That's excellent, Evelyn. That's very, very good. I placed the case into my small safe behind the bookshelf. You'll have a copy by tomorrow. Once we log that footage, their position becomes indefensible. If they attempt to file for conservatorship, we'll bury them before it sees a judge, Daniel assured me. And if they persist, we can move to press criminal charges for forgery and harassment. I sat down slowly, feeling the weight in my chest loosen even more. Good. Evelyn. Daniel paused. You're playing this brilliantly. Quiet. Methodical. That's exactly how we keep control. Quiet doesn't mean weak, I said softly. That's exactly right. We ended the call. I sat there for a while longer, staring at the photos lined up on the bookshelf. Richard's smile. Lauren as a child on his shoulders. All those summers, birthdays, quiet evenings on this very porch. I had raised Lauren in this house. I had given her everything a mother could. But somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing me as a person. I had become a prize to win, a burden to move, an obstacle to remove. And yet, as painful as that was, tonight I wasn't grieving. I was preparing. The storm was coming. But for once, I was the one holding the umbrella. The following week, the air shifted again. Not with confrontation this time, but with calculation. I heard the car doors before I saw them. Lauren's voice carried across the front lawn, chipper and high-pitched, like a rehearsed performance. And here we are. You're going to love this place. I peeked through the kitchen window. Lauren stepped out first, followed by a man in a polished suit, tall, mid-40s, briefcase in hand. The real estate agent. Behind them came another man, stocky, younger, with slicked-back hair and sunglasses, even though the sun was weak and gray that morning. An investor. They were already here, walking my property like they owned it, touring my home before I was even gone. I didn't go out to greet them. I didn't open the door. I simply stood at the far end of the living room, where the camera had a full view, and watched. After a few minutes of knocking and calling my name through the door, they gave up and let themselves in with Lauren's key, the spare I had given her years ago when she used to visit to check on me. I let them think they still held that access. I had already changed the locks on the main entry points. What they didn't realize was that the door they entered today only led into the sunroom. The rest of the house remained fully locked down. I listened from the hallway as they moved about, pretending to tour what they thought was already theirs. This space has so much potential, the investor said, his voice echoing slightly. If we gut it properly, you could easily flip this for double the current valuation. Lauren's voice followed, dripping with false enthusiasm. Exactly. My mother won't need all this space in assisted living, and she can finally have full-time care without worrying about any of this. I felt my teeth grind as I heard her toss my life into polite business terms, as if I were an outdated sofa being replaced. The agent chimed in next, his voice smooth. The location is prime. The property line extends all the way to the back fence, correct? That's right, Lauren answered confidently. My husband and I will be managing everything. My mother's been struggling to keep up. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, steadying my breath. Struggling. That's the word she used. Not once had she lifted a finger to help maintain this home after Richard died. Not once had she offered assistance unless it benefited her directly. And now I was being packaged as a liability in her sales pitch. They stayed for about 20 minutes, walking the perimeter, taking photos. I could hear Lauren's staged laughter, her over-eager explanations. She was working hard to charm them, fully convinced her plan was already complete. When they finally left, I remained inside, still and calm. Let them dream. Let them imagine. Let them walk through this house and taste the fantasy of control. Because when the truth comes, it will hit them harder than any locked door ever could. The pieces were moving exactly where I wanted them. That night, when the house was silent again, I sat in my study, not to strategize, not to scheme, but to feel. I pulled the old photo albums down from the shelf, the ones I hadn't touched in years. The leather binding was worn, the corners frayed from decades of fingers flipping through memories. The first page always made my breath catch. Richard, standing in front of the house the day we first bought the land. His arm around my waist, his smile full of hope. We were so young, so sure of everything. Back then, the idea of building a home felt like building a future too large to fail. I ran my fingers gently across his face, tracing his features like my hand could still feel his warmth. My throat tightened, but the tears didn't come. Not yet. Page after page, the years unfolded. Lauren as a baby, her chubby hands gripping Richard's thumbs, her first day of school, family barbecues in this very yard, holidays, vacations, her birthdays, all here. And then, slowly, something changed as I turned the pages. I could see it, even if I hadn't fully admitted it before now. The smiles faded, the distance grew, the warmth cooled. Lauren began bringing Brent to family dinners, always smiling, always polite on the surface. But behind his eyes, I saw calculation even then. Richard had noticed too, but we both chose silence. Parents want to believe the best about the people their children love. Even after Richard passed, I kept holding on. I let her in. I made excuses. I pretended she was still my little girl who used to chase butterflies in the backyard. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She hadn't been for years. And I had been blind. The photos didn't lie. I closed the album and sat back in my chair, staring out the window. The moonlight cut through the branches, casting long, thin shadows across the yard. My roses swayed gently in the breeze. The next morning, I woke up with a kind of clarity that surprised even me. There was no longer any hesitation, no lingering grief weighing down my steps. It was time to move. Quietly, decisively. I called Stephen again, my financial advisor, and scheduled a private meeting off the record. He didn't ask why, but his voice carried that same tone as before, respect mixed with cautious admiration. When I arrived, he closed his office door firmly behind me. "You're ready to make changes," he said, not as a question. "I am," I replied. "I want full protection. Ironclad, unbreakable. I want to transfer all liquid assets into a private trust immediately, one they can't access. Ever." He leaned back slightly, tapping his pen against his notepad. "You want a private, irrevocable trust?" "Yes. That will shield everything from any outside claims, conservatorship, lawsuits, even probate challenges. Once it's in place, your daughter and son-in-law can scream all they want. They won't touch a cent." "Good," I said, "and I want to go further." Stephen's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he was already writing. "Go on." "I want this trust to hold the house as well. Full ownership transferred out of my personal name into the trust. I remain the sole beneficiary for the remainder of my life, but after that, it passes to who I name. Not Lauren, not Brent." Stephen nodded slowly, his eyes locked on mine. "You've thought this through." "I have," I said softly. "They were ready to sell this house from under me. This home is not a bargaining chip for their gambling debts." He tapped his pen twice, thinking aloud. "There are some technical steps. We'll need a property appraiser to establish current market value for the transfer filing. There will be some fees, but once filed, this locks everything in place." "That's fine." He paused, watching me closely. "You understand, Evelyn, once we move these assets into the trust, you're the only person who can authorize any changes during your lifetime. And after you pass, it follows exactly what's written in the trust documents. No one can contest it." "That's exactly what I want." Stephen smiled faintly, like a man who's seen far too many families unravel but was quietly impressed by my calm resolve. "All right, we'll begin immediately." I signed the initial documents that afternoon. As the pen glided across each page, something inside me lifted. It wasn't anger. Not anymore. It was power. Quiet power. The next phase needed to happen quickly, and without a single word leaking back to Lauren or Brent. I made one call. Just one. Henry? It's Evelyn Whitaker. Henry Ballard had been Richard's closest friend for nearly 30 years. He was also one of the few people left I could trust implicitly. Widowed himself now, Henry had long since retired from real estate, but still kept enough connections to navigate certain doors quietly. "I need to sell the house," I said calmly. "On my terms. To someone I choose. And I need discretion." Henry paused for only a second. "You're serious?" "I'm done playing defense." His voice lowered, gentle but firm. "Evelyn, you don't have to leave your home to stop them." "I'm not leaving," I corrected. "I want to sell it to someone who will hold it in trust but allow me to remain as a lifelong tenant. They won't be able to touch it." Henry exhaled slowly. "A private transfer with a lifetime lease back?" "Exactly." He cleared his throat, a little impressed. "You've thought this through." "I've been forced to." Within 48 hours, Henry called back. "I found your buyer. Trusted family friend of mine. Old money, zero debt. Discreet. They'll purchase the house under a private LLC and lease it back to you for as long as you live here. Not a penny changes hands beyond what's necessary to complete the legal transfer, and their attorneys specialize in airtight asset shielding." "Perfect." Henry paused again. "Evelyn, you're cutting off your daughter completely, aren't you?" I sat very still at my kitchen table, glancing at the old wind chimes outside swaying in the breeze. I gave her everything a mother could give. But love without respect is hollow. That afternoon, the paperwork was drawn up. The property appraiser's report had already been filed, thanks to Stephen. The private sale contract outlined every detail: the irrevocable purchase, the lifetime lease, the non-transferable deed. The next morning, I signed everything in Henry's office. The buyer signed too, a middle-aged woman with calm eyes and a quiet nod. She understood what I was doing and why. There were no questions, only clean signatures, filed promptly with the county. By noon, the house was no longer legally mine, not in name, but in practice, it was more protected than it had ever been. I sat alone on the back porch afterward, tea warming my hands, watching my roses sway gently. The house stood exactly as it always had, but now it was shielded from their reach completely. I didn't feel triumphant, not yet, but I felt steady. They would arrive soon, with their trucks, with their assumptions, and they would discover the world had quietly shifted beneath their feet. They came early, earlier than I expected, as if they couldn't wait to watch me crumble. I heard the engines before I saw them. 2 large moving trucks rumbling up the driveway, followed by Brent's battered pickup and Lauren's shiny SUV. The convoy of vultures had arrived. I stayed seated on the front porch, calm, my tea untouched on the small table beside me. I wanted them to see me waiting, ready. Lauren was the first to step out, all business, clipboard in hand, her mouth tight with determination. Brent followed behind, sunglasses on even though the morning was still overcast. And then came the movers, already unloading dollies and boxes like it was a done deal. Lauren walked up the steps briskly, feigning a polite smile. "Mother, you weren't answering your phone." "I know," I said quietly. Brent stayed back, arms folded across his chest, surveying the house like a prize being secured. "We've arranged everything," Lauren continued, her voice rehearsed and cold. "The moving company will pack everything today. You'll be moved to St. Joseph's by this evening. The staff is ready for you." She spoke as if I were some fragile old thing, incapable of understanding my own life. I took my time sipping from the tea, letting the silence grow uncomfortable. Then I stood, slow and steady, and faced them fully. "No one is moving me," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "You're trespassing." Brent chuckled, shaking his head. "Evelyn, for God's sake, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're already under contract. The house is as good as sold." "That's where you're wrong." I reached for the envelope sitting neatly on the table and handed it to Lauren. The thick, official papers carried the weight of finality. "This is the notarized deed of sale, fully filed and recorded with the county," I said evenly. "As of last week, this house no longer belongs to me personally. It belongs to a private trust, held under LLC ownership. I remain a legal tenant for the duration of my lifetime. Lauren's face drained of color. She flipped through the pages desperately, her hand starting to shake. No, you can't do this, she whispered, voice breaking. We had an agreement. You had a plan, I corrected. You never had an agreement. Brent stepped forward, his voice hardening. This is fraud. You're not mentally competent to make these decisions. I smiled coldly. Oh? You'll have a hard time proving that, especially after your little performance last week. His eyes narrowed. What performance? I took a small step closer, lowering my voice. The one you kindly delivered, on camera. Every threat, every accusation, every attempt to intimidate me into signing over my estate. His jaw tightened. His hands balled into fists. You set me up. No, I said softly. You revealed yourself. The movers stood frozen near the truck, unsure if they should continue or retreat. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke. Just then, another car pulled into the driveway. Not police. Not a lawyer. Daniel Grayson stepped out, briefcase in hand, cool and composed. Lauren's shoulders sagged when she recognized him. Brent's face flushed with fury. You brought your lawyer here? Brent snapped. No, I said calmly. My attorney has been here from the very beginning. You're the ones who arrived late. Brent's bravado cracked right there on the porch. He hadn't expected this. He expected me to crumble, to plead. But I stood still, calm, while he spiraled. You think this little stunt will hold up in court? Brent spat. You think some trust paperwork and a little video clip is enough? Daniel, standing just behind me, opened his briefcase without a word. He retrieved a thin folder, flipped it open, and spoke with the same calm, deliberate tone he always carried. Actually, Mr. Connolly, your attempt to seize Ms. Whitaker's assets through fraudulent documents, unauthorized financial access, and now physical intimidation are well documented. In addition to the security footage, we have copies of your forged power of attorney submission at the bank. The legal case is already built. You are in violation of multiple state and federal statutes. Brent's face flushed deep red. You've got nothing, Daniel continued, unfazed. You've been recorded threatening conservatorship under false claims, attempting coercion, and now trespassing on private property. This property, I remind you, is no longer owned by Ms. Whitaker, but by a trust whose ownership structure fully excludes you and your wife. Lauren looked like she was shrinking with every word. Her clipboard trembled in her hands. Brent took one step forward, voice rising. This is my family's house. That's where you're wrong, I said softly. This is my home. You were never entitled to any of it. The moment hung heavy in the air, a silence thick with fury and panic. Then, from the edge of the driveway, came the final sound that shifted everything. The distant wail of a siren approaching. Brent's head snapped around, eyes wide. The sheriff's car pulled in smoothly behind the moving trucks. Two deputies stepped out, hands resting near their belts. Calm, professional, but unmistakably authoritative. Afternoon, Ms. Whitaker. One of them greeted me kindly, nodding at Daniel too. We received your attorney's trespassing complaint earlier this week. Based on the evidence provided and the outstanding investigation related to the forged legal documents, we're here to take Mr. Connolly into custody for questioning. Brent spun toward me, pure rage behind his eyes now. You called the cops? No, I said quietly. My lawyer called them, days ago. You were always coming here today, weren't you? You couldn't help yourself. The deputies approached calmly, speaking with measured tone. Sir, please turn around and place your hands behind your back. Lauren broke completely, her voice cracking. Brent, do what they say! Brent's face twisted in fury, but he wasn't stupid enough to resist. Slowly he turned, allowing the deputies to cuff his wrists. As they read him his rights, I stood still, my spine tall, watching the man who thought he could strip me of everything walk toward the patrol car in handcuffs. Lauren sobbed, clutching her clipboard as if it might anchor her. She looked at me with wide, broken eyes, but I offered nothing. No sympathy. No softness. She had chosen her side. The deputies pulled away, leaving the driveway suddenly silent again. The movers, wide-eyed, quietly began closing the truck doors without a word. Daniel turned to me, his voice soft. "It's done, Evelyn." I took a long breath, steady and slow. "No," I whispered. "It's beginning." The house was so quiet after they left, it almost felt like a dream. Lauren stood in the middle of the driveway, hugging herself, eyes darting from the empty trucks to my porch, as if trying to make sense of a world that had spun completely out of her control. She looked so much smaller now. The tight professional veneer had cracked, leaving nothing but raw, desperate emotion behind. "You didn't have to do this," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. "We could have worked something out." I walked down the steps, steady, meeting her eyes head on. "You never wanted to work something out, Lauren. You wanted control." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Brent, he got in over his head. With the cards, the loans. I thought." She shook her head as if she couldn't even finish her sentence. "We were trying to fix it before it got worse." "You were trying to fix your problems by dismantling my life," I said softly. "You didn't see me as your mother. You saw me as a resource." Her lip trembled. "You don't understand the pressure we've been under." "No, Lauren," I said, my voice still calm but steel underneath. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Watching my own daughter plan my removal, like I was some tired old piece of furniture you were done with." She crumpled, shoulders shaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. But you did." I cut her off, my tone firm but not cruel. "And you did it with full intention." For a moment, we both stood there in silence. "I lost everything today," she whispered, barely audible. I shook my head. "No, you lost what you never had. This house was never yours to take. My trust was never yours to exploit. You still have your life. You still have your freedom." I let the words hang for a beat before finishing quietly. "Brent may not." Her breath caught. The full weight of that truth finally sinking in. Daniel stepped beside me, waiting patiently. "We should go inside, Evelyn. The deputies may need to follow up with you this evening. And I'll be coordinating with the prosecutor's office now that everything's on record." I nodded. As I turned to head back inside, Lauren called after me one last time. "I didn't want it to come to this." I paused on the steps, glancing back over my shoulder. My voice was quiet, but sharp. "Yes, you did. You just never imagined I'd say no." She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking, as I finally stepped inside and gently closed the door behind me. The lock clicked softly, and the house, my house, was mine again. For the first time in months, I let myself lean back against the door and breathe. The exhaustion was there, but so was something else. Relief, not triumph, not revenge, just peace. The storm had passed, and I was still standing.